On a quiet Sunday morning, 69-year-old Dr. Emmett Velton invited a man he barely knew into his home. Hours later, Velton lay fatally injured in the hallway of his Phoenix, Arizona condominium, and the stranger had vanished with his car. The entire encounter, from their arrival to the suspect's exit, was captured on surveillance video, yet this vicious attack remains unsolved. It's a chilling case, likely of goodwill turned tragic, and it continues to baffle investigators and haunt the community. Emmett Velton was a respected psychologist known for his work in cognitive behavioral therapy and addiction recovery. Originally from Tennessee, he had made Phoenix his home for the last 11 years of his life. On April 24, 2011, Easter Sunday morning, Velton crossed paths with a young homeless man in downtown Phoenix. Around 8:10 that morning, security cameras at Velton's high-rise condo recorded him entering the building with the unknown young man by his side. The footage, later retrieved by detectives, showed Velton and the man walking together from the parking area where Velton's Toyota RAV4 was parked, into the lobby. Tragically, this encounter would soon turn very violent. Roughly 3 hours later, Velton was discovered collapsed in a hallway near the elevator, suffering from a severe head injury. It appeared he had been beaten and left for dead. By the time help arrived, the young man was gone, along with Velton's car, which had been driven away from the scene. Velton was rushed to the hospital, and despite initially clinging to life long enough to speak to officers, he succumbed to his injuries on May 3, 2011. Phoenix police launched an intensive investigation into Dr. Velton's slaying. From the very start, they had more evidence than many other cases, giving hope that a quick arrest could be made. Within hours, detectives hit evidentiary pay dirt. A prime suspect was clearly visible on camera, accompanying Velton on the morning of the crime. Investigators obtained multiple angles of surveillance footage capturing the suspect's face and build as he walked with Velton into the building. In addition, the crime scene yielded a critical forensic clue. The perpetrator had stepped in Velton's blood and left behind a clean, bloody footprint in the apartment. This bloody shoe print was carefully lifted by crime scene technicians, preserved as key evidence. Velton himself provided a crucial lead before losing consciousness. He described his attacker as a young white male and revealed that he had picked the man up from a homeless shelter downtown. Using that information and the video images, police circulated a description of the suspect to the public and local shelters. Unfortunately, the description wasn't overly specific, describing him as being of both average height and weight, and white. The suspect was last seen on video calmly leaving the building and driving off in Velton's Toyota RAV4, presumably right after the attack. Velton's vehicle was later found abandoned in another part of town soon after. Despite this abundance of evidence, identifying the perpetrator proved challenging. Investigators had no name to match the blurry face on the video, and initial efforts to recognize him were fruitless. Police showed the footage and description around the shelter and other local agencies, but no one could identify the young man, suggesting he might have just been passing through. Physical evidence, while helpful, didn't directly point to a known individual. The bloody shoe print revealed the tread pattern and likely shoe size, but without a suspect to compare, it remained just an intriguing clue. As mentioned, the cops recovered Velton's car and presumably fully processed it. It may have contained fingerprints or DNA, but if so, the details were never released publicly, which isn't unusual given this is an active and ongoing investigation. Several theories as to why this unknown attacker targeted Dr. Velton have emerged in this case, none of which have been verified. The leading theory is that Velton was the victim of a robbery gone wrong. Being generous and trusting, he gave a ride to a young man who then attacked him, possibly intending to steal valuables or the car. The fact that the suspect fled in the victim's vehicle and that Velton's wallet and other items were reportedly left untouched suggests the car may have been the primary target. In this scenario, the slaying may not have been premeditated. It could have occurred because Velton resisted, or the assailant saw an opportunity and turned violent impulsively. Notably, Dr. Velton was known to the local homeless population as someone who was charitable and kind. It may be the case that this reputation worked its way to the wrong person, who saw Dr. Velton as an easy mark. Given the ease with which the attacker functioned after committing a horrific crime, some have speculated that this wasn't his first rodeo. Another theory which has been discussed online but isn't substantiated with any actual evidence is the theory that Dr. Velton may have tried to hook up with the homeless man. Dr. Velton was openly gay, which appears to have led to this theory gaining significant traction. However, despite the popularity of this theory, there's some major problems with it. Police canvassed the homeless population extensively, and there's no evidence that Dr. Velton had been engaged in such activities previously. It seems unlikely that a 69-year-old man would wake up one day and decide to start cruising around the local homeless shelters. If this had been his thing, it seems likely that people would have mentioned it when the police came sniffing around. Further, Dr. Velton was able to give some evidence before he perished, and presumably he would have mentioned this to investigators. Further, the cops fully investigated Dr. Velton's history and interviewed his closest friends. According to news reports, they couldn't explicitly say that he never engaged in such behavior, but no one ever reported that he did. A number of theories exist about the assailant, too. Investigators believe the perpetrator may not have been a local Phoenix resident at all. Since no one at the shelter or in the local homeless community recognized him, it's theorized he was a transient drifter passing through the city. He might have arrived in Phoenix shortly before Easter 2011 and left immediately after the crime. Another theory suggests that he perhaps was known by people who attended local homeless shelters, but that his reputation forced people into silence. Given the extreme act he committed against Dr. Velton, this doesn't seem to be an inherently unreasonable idea. Another line of speculation is that the suspect could have been mentally unstable or under the influence of street pharmaceuticals, leading to a sudden violent outburst. Perhaps the attacker wasn't primarily motivated by theft, but by an imagined provocation. For instance, Dr. Velton may have said something that triggered the attacker, even if it was completely benign. However, given the suspect's apparent composure on video, calmly walking in and later driving away, many believe greed was the motive more than rage. The theft of the car indicates a clear intent to gain from the crime, rather than an unplanned scuffle gone wrong. However, on the flip side, it appears that he simply abandoned the vehicle, so perhaps this was just his way of getting as far from the scene as fast as possible before the crime was discovered. That said, his rapid flight from the crime scene and his forethought to abandon the vehicle before an all-points bulletin went out for it suggests this was a man who was thinking ahead. As of today, the case of Emmett Velton remains unsolved, with little to no progress having been made in the last decade and a half. Whether this case is ever solved or not will likely depend on whether the cops were able to get DNA evidence from the scene. If there was biological evidence found from the perpetrator, it seems to be only a matter of time before forensic science catches up with him. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, don't forget to check out my podcast, merch store, and more by clicking the links in the description. On a quiet autumn morning in October 2012, a man walking along Zinjan Beach in Split, Croatia, noticed an unbearable stench coming from a discarded plastic bag. Inside, to his shock, was a rotting leg. This grisly discovery marked the start of one of Split's most perplexing unsolved mysteries: a dismembered John Doe, whose remains would soon surface on two different beaches. Over a decade later, both the victim's name and his perpetrator remain unknown. The gruesome nature of the crime stunned the community at large and spurred an exhaustive police investigation, yet every lead only deepened the mystery. The first body part was found on October 8, 2012, when a passerby at Zinyan Beach stumbled upon a severed leg inside a plastic bag. This leg was confirmed to be human almost immediately, sparking the initial investigation. Just over a week later, on October 16th, another gruesome find was reported across town at the Zenta Harbor. A partially decomposed human torso was spotted wedged in the rocks of a marina breakwater. The torso had arms attached but was missing its head and both legs, clearly linking it to the earlier discovery. The following day, police divers searching the waters near that spot recovered the victim's head, which had been wrapped in newspaper and placed in its own plastic sack. No other remains were ever located despite extensive searches. All the recovered remains were sent for forensic examination, which confirmed they belonged to one individual. Investigators extracted a DNA profile from the victim's tissue and bone, but it didn't match anyone in Croatia's DNA databases. Fingerprints were also lifted from the plastic bag that held the head, offering a potential clue to the perpetrator, but these prints were of poor quality. The autopsy shed further light on the crime. The medical examiner determined that the John Doe likely died from severe chest injuries before being dismembered. He had multiple broken ribs. Early reports noted at least 8 fractures, as well as a broken collarbone and numerous bruises on his body, all inflicted while he was still alive. According to the coroner, these traumatic injuries suggested that the man either suffered a vicious beating or a catastrophic fall. However, given the subsequent events, the investigators were very clear that even if this was a fall, he didn't do it intentionally. The advanced state of decomposition made it difficult to determine how long the victim had been dead. Pathologists estimated he could have died anywhere from about 1 month to as much as a year before the remains were discovered. A forensic analysis was commissioned to try to figure out how the man appeared in life. The reconstruction showed an older white male who was balding and had short gray hair. He was likely around 5'10", and the investigation indicated he had significant dental work done in the past. Medical examiners also noted signs of kidney and heart disease, suggesting he was in poor health and possibly had mobility issues. These clues painted a picture of a man in his 60s or 70s who lived a quiet, perhaps housebound life. Armed with the composite sketch and physical details, Split police appealed to the public for help in identifying the unknown man. They urged citizens to consider whether any elderly male neighbor or relative had gone missing from their community. This focus on immobile seniors was based on the investigators' hunch that the victim had been frail and largely homebound. If such a person quietly disappeared, it might not immediately spark suspicion from neighbors or relatives. The perpetrator may have been able to simply pass it off as an instance where the man perished naturally, and given his poor health, further questions were unlikely to be raised. Despite exhaustive efforts, by the end of 2012, the case had grown cold. Not a single useful clue had been found, and the investigators' frustration grew as every potential lead hit a dead end. Over the years, several theories have emerged about what might have happened. Investigators strongly suspect that this man was targeted by someone he knew, most likely a caregiver. Indeed, police noted that the John Doe appeared to have led a very isolated life in Split or its outskirts, which would make it easier for his absence to go unnoticed for a long time. This profile supports the idea that the perpetrator took advantage of the man's solitude and vulnerability. Some have speculated that the motive could have been financial, for example, concealing the death to continue collecting the man's pension or for an inheritance. Another idea suggests that the reason why the man hasn't been discovered is that he wasn't a local at all. Split is an extremely popular vacation destination. It's possible that someone from elsewhere in Europe may have brought their elderly relative to Split under the auspices of a sunny vacation. During the vacation, this relative may have slain this elderly man and then covered it up using macabre techniques. This theory also has elements of the previous ideas discussed, since it may provide a convenient excuse for why someone is gone. If an elderly and unwell person from, say, France or Germany died on vacation in Croatia, this may not raise too many eyebrows back home from other relatives. Notably, this seems to be a case that would be ripe for solving with genetic genealogy if it happened in the United States or Canada. That said, it happened in Europe, and the laws surrounding genetic genealogy are different, so perhaps the Split John Doe case will remain sadly unsolved. At dusk, a single ripple on Arkansas's White River can spark a legend. For over a century, locals have whispered that something huge lurks beneath its muddy waters, a hulking gray beast, the so-called White River Monster. Rumors of a strange creature in the White River date back at least to the turn of the 20th century. An Arkansas newspaper in 1912 reported that lumbermen saw a massive, boulder-like thing at the bottom of the river which suddenly moved, convincing them it was a giant turtle. Over the next decade, a few other witnesses claimed to see an animal with gray, crusty skin blowing water into the air. These local tales remained obscure until the summer of 1937, when the monster exploded into national news. In July 1937, near Newport, Arkansas, farmer Bramlett Bateman rushed to the White River after his farmhands alerted him that something enormous had risen from the water. Bateman later described the creature as wide as a car and 3 cars long, with a smooth, wrinkled hide like that of an elephant. He wasn't alone. At least 3 other locals attested to the same sight. As word spread, the elusive beast earned the nickname Whitey. Newport soon caught monster fever, and the town quickly built a viewing platform on the riverbank and charged 25 cents admission to crowds of sightseers. Reporters and thrill seekers poured in, giving the town a much-needed influx of cash during the Depression. The White River Monster became a media sensation. A scuba diver was even hired to search the deep pool where Whitey was seen, but after several dives into the murky water, he came up empty-handed. Some experts suggested at the time the creature was nothing more than an oversized fish, perhaps an alligator gar or giant catfish, or even a floating log stirred by bubbles. By late July, with no definitive proof, the frenzy died down. The mysterious creature slipped out of the headlines, leaving behind only stories and a newfound local legend. The White River Monster stayed quiet, or at least out of the news, for the next few decades, but it simmered below the surface, growing into an Arkansas urban legend. It surfaced again in the early 1970s. In 1971, fresh reports from Newport reignited interest. Several locals claimed they saw a gray, humped creature in the river that summer. One man even snapped a blurry photo of a spiny-backed hump in the water, and soon afterward, enormous 3-toed footprints were found pressed in the river mud. Also, while I do have the photograph taken at the time on the screen right now, this is one where I really can't recommend that you take a look if you aren't already doing so. There does appear to be something there that could technically be described as humps, but the photograph is simply too blurry to be useful at all. I suppose that's par for the course for cryptid photography, though. At any rate, despite the grainy nature of the photo, excitement swept the area once more. In 1973, Arkansas's legislature declared part of the White River a White River Monster Refuge, legally protecting the creature within that stretch. By 1974, the sightings had stopped as abruptly as they began, and the monster once again slipped back into obscurity. Dozens of theories have bubbled up over the years. One popular biological theory holds that the monster was actually a known animal misidentified in an unfamiliar environment. For instance, some researchers point to the Florida manatee as a likely candidate. Manatees are massive, often 10 to 15 feet long, weighing over 1,000 pounds, and have smooth gray or nearly white skin. They also make loud blowing sounds when coming up for air, just like witnesses reported of the monsters. Notably, manatees can tolerate fresh water and sometimes wander far from Florida. There's historical precedent for this too, and one even swam to Memphis in 2006 before sadly perishing. A lost manatee in Arkansas could explain a lot. The creature's size, color, and tendency to surface and roll in the water would absolutely fit this cryptid. Many locals also favor the idea of an enormous alligator snapping turtle, a native river creature with a spiky shell and hefty body that could resemble a monster. Even so, the largest snapping turtles on record are still far smaller than a car-sized beast described in the White River Monster urban legend. Of course, there's always the chance that the White River Monster was more imagination than reality, a mix of exaggerated sightings and hoaxes. The 1937 monster craze gave Newport a welcome boost during times of economic hardship, so some believe the hype was deliberately encouraged for publicity. This may have explained the genesis of the urban legend, and from there people began to believe they really saw this fantastical creature. To this day, the White River Monster remains an unsolved mystery. What's certain is that the monster has left a lasting mark on Arkansas lore. Interestingly, some people have also added to the lore by claiming early American settlers or Native Americans interacted with the creature. These, however, appear to be definite later fabrications to give the story more of an air of reality. Interestingly, Newport and the surrounding region still embrace the legend with local festivals, museum exhibits, and an official refuge along the river. If the White River Monster was a hoax drummed up during the Depression to boost the economy, it's still paying dividends almost a century later. Gilles de Rais was born around 1404 into one of Brittany's wealthiest noble families. By inheritance, he became Baron of Retz, one of the oldest baronies in Brittany, and amassed extensive estates across Brittany, Anjou, Poitou, and other regions. This had the effect of making him one of the most important lords in western France. As a young man, he gained renown during the 100 Years' War, fighting alongside Joan of Arc in major battles. In 1429, after helping lift the English siege of Orléans and participating in numerous victories, Gilles was appointed Marshal of France, the nation's highest military rank. His courage and battlefield prowess earned him great prestige, and he sat among King Charles VII's circle of trusted commanders. Off the battlefield, Gilles de Rais was extravagantly wealthy and lived as a grand seigneur. He maintained a large retinue of soldiers and servants, spent lavishly on art, music, and religious works, and even staged an enormous theatrical spectacle in Orléans to celebrate the war victories. His estates were among the richest in France, but his spending was so reckless that he began to deplete his fortune. He sold off portions of his family lands to fund his lifestyle, angering his surviving relatives and causing rifts within his family. Despite these troubles, de Rais remained a respected noble in the early 1430s. He also grew pious, at least outwardly, founding a private chapel called the Chapel of the Holy Innocents in 1433. notably staffed with a choir of youngsters he handpicked himself. This later detail would seem chilling in light of the accusations to come. By 1435, Gilles de Rais had withdrawn from royal service and returned permanently to his lands, ostensibly to focus on his own interests. Unbeknownst to the world at large, horrifying rumors had started to swirl among the peasantry in the countryside. Little ones were disappearing from villages near de Rais' castles, never to be seen again. At first, such absences raised little alarm. It was not uncommon for peasants to enter service in a noble's household and lose contact with their families. Some parents likely believed their missing sons had been taken on as pages or servants by the baron. But as the years went on, whispers grew that something far more sinister was afoot. According to later trial testimony, by the late 1430s, people in the area had seen de Rais' servants disposing of the corpses of dozens of youngsters. Still, locals felt powerless to act against so powerful a lord and a man who was widely hailed as a hero of France. Inside Gilles de Rais' palatial halls, dark deeds were indeed taking place if the confessions are to be believed. De Rais had taken to studying alchemy and demon summoning, possibly in desperation to restore his dwindling wealth. He hired an Italian sorcerer, Francesco Prelati, who promised to help him conjure a demon named Baron that could produce gold. The rituals quickly grew grotesque, and at one attempted summoning, Prelati later testified, the demon demanded an offering of body parts, which de Rais happily provided. By his own confession, Gilles de Rais began his disturbed activities sometime in 1432 or 1433, initially for these occult reasons. For the next several years, he and a small circle of trusted servants indulged in a spree of abductions and slayings. The victims were typically local peasant boys, though he sometimes captured local girls as well. They were lured to his castles with promises of food or work, yet when they arrived, these innocents met nightmarish fates. Later estimates of the number of victims vary widely. Gilles de Rais' indictment claimed as many as 140 had been cruelly ended at his hands. Notably, the shocking unraveling of Gilles de Rais' secret life began with a seemingly unrelated incident. In May 1440, de Rais became embroiled in a dispute over one of his castles. The conflict turned violent when Gilles, defying the Duke of Brittany's officers, stormed into a local church and kidnapped a clergyman during Mass. Enraged by this act of sacrilege and rebellion, the Bishop of Nantes launched an investigation into the baron's conduct. It was then, as the church authorities quietly gathered information, that all the darkest rumors about missing children finally came pouring out. Shocked and alarmed, the Duke of Brittany now acted against a man who had once been his trusted vassal. Notably, and something that generally gets lost in modern tellings of this tale, is that the Duke had essentially lost face in a big way. To have a direct vassal of his commit such disgusting acts right under his nose, in essence, stained his reputation as well. In September 1440, ducal troops arrested Gilles de Rais and several of his accomplices. The celebrated war hero was about to face justice for some of the most ghastly crimes in history. Gilles de Rais was put on trial in the city of Nantes in the fall of 1440. Unusually for the time, he faced a dual proceeding, one trial before the ecclesiastical court of the church, and another before a secular court under the Duke of Brittany's authority. The catalogue of charges was grim, but in general they revolved around both the accused slayings and the occult activities. The trial records became so graphic that the judges ordered the worst parts stricken from the official transcript. The surviving records of what occurred is so disgusting and disturbing that I can't even hint at what he was accused of on this platform. At first, Gilles de Rais responded to the proceedings with defiance and denial. He even challenged the court's jurisdiction angrily until a threat of excommunication brought him to heel. Ultimately, on October 21st, 1440, faced with the weight of evidence and the prospect of torture, Gilles de Rais broke down and confessed in open court. Notably, it was the threat of torture that made him confess, not the actual torture itself. He admitted to the judges that he had committed the atrocities as charged, all in the pursuit of occult-based wealth and his own sick hedonism. This shocking confession, combined with the already overwhelming testimony, made the verdict a foregone conclusion. The planned torture of the accused was canceled since he confessed voluntarily, albeit under threat. Within days, the courts pronounced their judgments. On October 25th, the secular court condemned Gilles de Rais to death. In what was perhaps an even more significant move, the church court likewise declared him guilty of slaying 150 innocent young souls and excommunicated him. Two of Gilles's closest aides were also sentenced to die for their part in the affairs. The trial had moved with remarkable swiftness considering the high stature of the accused. It lasted only about a month from start to finish. In that brief span, the illustrious Marshal of France, once a shining star of Joan of Arc's army, had been unmasked as one of the worst people in history. The conviction rested not only on Gilles' own confession, but on a multitude of eyewitness accounts and material evidence collected from his castles. Modern historians note that the robustness of the case against de Rais left little room for doubt at the time. The sentence was carried out on October 26, 1440, on a river island just outside Nantes. Gilles de Rais, age 35, was to be hanged and then burned, a common execution for those convicted of the most heinous crimes and heresy. He was to be finished off alongside his two chief accomplices. Contemporary accounts say that Gilles de Rais approached his execution with dignity and remorse. He addressed the gathered crowd, expressing contrition for his sins, and urged his partners in crime to pray for their own personal forgiveness for what they had all done. At mid-morning, Gilles was hanged until dead, and his body, suspended above a pyre, was then lowered into the flames. Thus ended the life of Gilles de Rais, in infamy and fire, damned forever for his disgusting and depraved conduct. In the centuries since 1440, the case of Gilles de Rais has remained a subject of both morbid fascination and debate. Early on, many simply accepted the verdict at face value. Over time, however, some historians began to question whether Gilles de Rais was truly the monster the 1440 trial had depicted. Skepticism about the case arose as early as the Enlightenment. Voltaire commented that the occult and witchcraft portion of the trial necessarily cast doubt on the conclusions reached in said trial, and this hesitation planted the seed of doubt for future historians. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a few writers openly argued that de Rais had been wrongfully condemned. These early revisionists wondered if the sensational charges were trumped up by the Church or the Duke of Brittany, who stood to gain from de Rais' downfall. Or at least, that was the revisionist history theory at the time, and we'll get to that in a moment. One theory suggests that the Duke of Brittany coveted Gilles de Rais' lands and wealth. According to these historians, after the trial, the Duke acquired many of the Baron's forfeited estates. Could the Duke and the Bishop of Nantes have conspired to destroy a troublesome vassal and split his riches? Another point raised is the involvement of the Inquisition. One of de Rais' judges was an inquisitor, leading some to claim he was just another victim of witch hunt hysteria. However, according to most experts, an inquisitor being a judge in a church court in the medieval era isn't quite the rarity that some revisionist historians make it out to be. As strongly hinted at, Mainstream historians find these revisionist theories unlikely. For one, most of Gilles de Rais's properties ultimately ended up with his family, and the Duke of Brittany had been a long-time protector of Gilles until compelling evidence forced his hand. Further, the humiliation wrought upon the Duke by the activities of his vassals simply can't be understated. This wasn't a one-time act. The Duke had let one of his vassals act in the most deranged manner possible for a period of up to 8 years, reflecting extremely poorly upon him. Further, the church didn't receive anything directly from the act, and Gilles de Rais had in fact been a significant benefactor of the church prior to the accusations. Any plot to falsely accuse de Rais would have required dozens of people, all of whom were in on it. Given the era's rudimentary coordination, such an enormous fraud would have been difficult to stage. Modern scholars also point out that by 1440, there really was an abundance of testimony about the missing children. The initial witness statements about peasant boys vanishing weren't a rumor, and there's evidence that reports were made. This stands in stark contrast to a case like Elizabeth Bathory, where despite similar accounts, there's no evidence of any actual missing people. Simply put, something real and terrible was happening, even if the precise details are tangled with medieval fears of demonic cults. Interestingly, Gilles de Rais wasn't defiant to the end by any means, and this wasn't a man who lacked personal courage or heroism. He was indeed believed to be one of the most heroic people of his era, before his true nature was known. If such an individual had been falsely accused, it's often speculated that his numerous friends and relations would have come to his rescue. However, the fact that they didn't has led many to believe that these individuals may have harbored significant suspicions about his character. Perhaps they saw him committing acts on campaign that went beyond the standard brutality of medieval warfare. At present, most historians conclude that Gilles de Rais was in fact the monster he was claimed to be, and his name will forever be associated with some of the worst individual acts in history.